Pharma companies spend billions on meetings and events, but how much of that investment is actually paying off? Are we still using outdated methods to engage ACPs and key stakeholders, or is it time for maybe a smarter AI driven approach? From CRM first strategies to data driven engagement, and from compliance to AI driven insights and predictive analytics, we're breaking it all down today. If you're in the pharma or life sciences space, this is one conversation that you cannot afford to miss. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Events Demystified podcast, where we demystify the world of in-person, virtual, and hybrid events, AV production, and AI technology by sharing practical tips, tricks, and strategies to help your event succeed. This podcast is brought to you by Trefan Events, a woman-owned boutique event production agency that caters to event professionals, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. We specialize in AV and AI education, integration, automation, and implementation, all based on our Fit for Events framework, which focuses on futuristic AV production, innovative AI technology, thriving audiences, and empowering behind-the-scenes teams. And I'm your host, Anka Platon Trefan, with over 2 decades of hands-on experience in event production, event management, and now AI technologies and cybersecurity.
Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the Events Demystified podcast. I'm your host, Anka Platon Trefan, and today we are diving into the world of pharma event tech and customer engagement with a true innovator in the space. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Pierre Metrailler, CEO of SpotMe and Onomi, and a pioneer really in the event technology space. Pierre has spent over 20 years shaping how business engages through events. He led SpotMe transformation from a hardware networking company into a SaaS powerhouse, and recently launched Onomi, a platform that changes customer engagement for life sciences from the bottom up. He's also an adventurer. He's into ski, mountaineering, ski running, and has a deep respect for event professionals, having run over 1,000 events himself. And with that, as I said, bring Pierre on stage with me. Welcome to the show, Pierre. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Anka.
I'm so excited to have a conversation with you. And before we dive into the pharma events, because this is one topic that, as I was telling you earlier, I have not touched on, and it's such a big part of the industry. And I don't think that a lot of people talk about. But before we get into that, I have to ask, you mentioned to me in a prior conversation that you're a ski mountaineering and a ski running fan. And that sounds very intense. What is the toughest challenge that you faced on the mountain? And if you were to draw a parallel to maybe leadership and mindset, does that lesson carry over into business?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that being born and raised in the Swiss Alps, loving the mountains, loving the great outdoor, the things that we like doing here is going in this big ski tours or big hiking tour. We're a little snobbish, so we call them sky running. It's literally running really high in the mountains. And you do those races, those trail races in the summer. These are trail races. And you go on for a couple of hours and you have self support. So, there's no aid station or whatever. And usually you do this in the summer. And actually, in one of those races, it's high in altitude, but you're studying with shorts and t-shirt. But even though it's summer, it's still mountains. And in one of those races a couple of years ago, it actually started to snow in the middle of it. And with your running shoes, you suddenly like just knee deep in the snow.
Soaked. You're
And
soaked.
and well, it was worse than that. And then it started to get like a lot of fog, and everyone got lost. And
Oh, wow.
I realized that the race wasn't really going to happen anymore, I guess. And actually, it took me forever to find my way and
Wow.
finally find my way to the actual hut to like try to get my hands that had frostbite and finally get my way down. And by the time I reached the arrival, they were actually dismounting the arch and the things where people were packing up. So it was not a great experience. But the one thing, if I needed that, the one thing that reminds me, if I think of our entrepreneur journey here at SpotMe, is the grit. Is
Mm.
you don't give up because you can't give up, right? So you'll have to find your way out. You have to continue trying and finding your way. And it hurts, it's painful, and it's mentally challenging because you don't really know what's going to happen. And you're alone out there, and it's a big, big space in the mountains. There's nobody who's going to come and help you. And you could even think if you're not calling somebody, but nobody's going to fly in because of the fog. And so that's a little bit what our journey has been here at SpotMe. We've been one of the sort of the challengers in the industry. We came very early on with an innovative product. Heard about it was this networking device, which today, when I tell the story, people think maybe it's a little strange. But back then, it was incredibly innovative. But it was tough because you had to go out there and sell it. And people were like, wow, what do I need this device to help me find people to connect with? But anyway, with grit, persevering, this is how I can connect to that story.
I love that. Well, I love the parallel because resilience in the mountains is a lot like resilience in business. It all connects, right? And I guess speaking of challenges, because you just alluded to that, I love to shift gears into how you got started with SpotMe. Just tell us the story that you just highlighted, and your journey for anyone that doesn't yet know it, because I'm pretty sure you've shared it a few times. But I like our audience to get a little bit of a sneak peek behind the curtains and what brought you where you are today.
Yeah, the one thing I always like to disclose is even though I sometimes say I'm the founder, that's technically not true. So I joined the company, and it was a group of micro engineers in a local university here in Switzerland who had this idea, and they already had raised money for that, to build this networking device called SpotMe. And it will literally do what it said. It helps people spot other people at events. And I was actually a computer science undergrad student. I dropped out of college at the time to pursue the idea, eventually graduated, but that's a later story, and very passionate about being the software guy with a group of hardware people. And it was the best years of my life, being able to build a real product and be part of this journey, bringing that product to market. That, in hindsight, was very painful because as an engineer, you think you're going to spend a year or two in building something that you think is great, and then it's going to sell by itself. Of course, it doesn't. And it was a very hard landing to face the reality that building it was just a little part of it. And we had absolutely no idea how to basically market it. And this is also where I really like, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity here, is to have been forced in a way to go out and having to sell it
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
having to go and operate and launching in the space. So this is how I move. Continued to build software, but also went into event planning and running these events because we had nobody to do that, and eventually selling those and finding new customers, and then building teams, building an event operations team, building sales teams, and eventually having the opportunity to become CEO later on. And so, yeah, my message to anyone who is thinking about potentially starting a business, I mean, it helps if you can be in the product, if you can be the technology guy, because it's helpful. But also, you may not be the founder and you always have an opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you, I'm a computer science graduate myself, but I graduated in computer science and then I switched path and went into AV production to become a sound engineer instead. And I can tell you that I've met so many technical people over the course of my life. And it is not easy to move from like the technical space of building a product and then to become the sales, the marketing, the strategist. So kudos to you for being able to wear both hats, because I'm pretty sure at that time, especially in the beginning, you were starting to like put on all these different hats and you're like, this fits, this doesn't. How am I going to make this one fit better? Because it's not always like a natural thing that just comes to you, but it is a learned skill set that you can definitely learn
Yeah.
if you put your mind to it. So I really appreciate the story because it gives hopes to anyone that thinks, well, I just speak technology. Oh, well, I just understand this part and I'm super technical and I can't even like explain that in layman's term to someone that it won't understand what I'm talking about because it's so removed from that world, right? And when it comes to leadership, as you are going through the motion of all the stages, what was one of the biggest, I guess, leadership lesson that you've learned
Mm.
during that time?
Yeah. I sort of knew it was that, but I recently heard about a story of a great restaurant founder in New York who has this, I think it's called the salt shaker theory. And the guy he's like this brilliant restaurateur who is like having these beautiful restaurants with fantastic food. But he became crazy because he realized that he had to remind people, like his staff, every time, like how to do it. And actually, he uses this analogy of the salt shaker. It seems like his guest and his staff, their only job is like to move it off the center of the table. And what he was doing all day long is just like, this needs to be perfect. It needs to be at
Moving it back
right
in.
the center of the table. Move it back right at the center of the table. And for me, this leadership lesson is that your job as the CEO, your job as the founder is to be constantly reminding people. And it's very important. I don't mean this in a way that's like condescending or like you stupid. Like, no, it's just like when you're the founder, when you just things are very special to you, and the magic in the business, and I think in any business, but it's true in events because it's a service. At the end, it's a service experience that you provide, just very much like hospitality, is that you have to create this fantastic experience for customers and for attendees alike. And so being this sort of chief reminding officer and having the constant discipline to share the passion and that I personally have for the attention to details, and eventually building a team that really embraces that, and that in turn become that kind of person, and that sort of cascade that passion of attention to detail to newcomers and new joiners, and constantly bringing the
Mhm.
salt shaker at the center of the table. I think to me that's like the biggest leadership lesson. But it's painful, it hurts, it's boring. Like if you do this over many years, several decades, and say, this morning again, I'll have to remind everyone this is how we do it. But I think this is the part that makes it click in a way.
I like that. I like the analogy. And I remember actually, I was working with someone that ended up starting their own company and having this vision for what that company was going to be. And in the beginning, like the first 2 years of our interactions and friendship, and we were close friends. And then I saw him take this idea into an actual business model and a successful business model. But at times, I'll tell you, like, it was very annoying to hear him say the same thing again and again, moving the salt shake in the middle of the table of what this business was going to be, what this idea, what this vision, what was the purpose, all of that. And he was doing just this, right? Like in simple way, in simple terms. But from on the receiving end, you're like, okay, we get it. You're obsessed with that. Okay, how about we talk about something else? You're like, no, 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 this is what we need to do, this is what the purpose, right? So you're right, it can be like a very like hard lesson to learn for someone that doesn't have that mindset. But also on the receiving end, you might have people that be like rolling their eyes. Okay,
Yeah.
you've told us like a gazillion of times, we get it. And you're like, but do you really get it?
And you get, I think, for me, in terms of leadership, it's also how do you do this in a way that isn't going to end up you being tagged as that's micromanagement and all this kind of things, right? So
Yeah.
there's obviously a way to do it that's warm, that's kind, that's encouraging, that's like time at the right moment, and that's not like every time you see it, you say it.
Right.
That was, and to some extent, probably my team will be smiling when they listen to this. It's still, I would say, a development journey, right?
Yeah.
But for sure, I know everybody here would have to be the chief reminding officer. And that's also how, because the best thing is, I think we've been able to build at Spot, we've built a bit of a reputation. Recently, I was visiting a customer for 15 years, and it's the largest professional services company in the world. And they use these words like, Pierre, what we really like with your teams is that how, I think they said regimented They are. And it's funny because most places you wouldn't think it's a compliment,
Right.
right? It's very
Right.
well admitted. And yet I take it as like the best compliment. And I think in a way also it's also true if you think of hospitality. The true definition of luxury is like going to hotel A and the service is exactly one way, and then you go to the other place and it's exactly the same way because that's like the trademark, it's like the signature of that chain. And that, I think, as a company, even though we're in event tech, is one of the things we're striving for.
Absolutely. That's beautifully said. Well, let's dive into pharma meetings. But before we even get to that, because pharma meetings serves a lot of different purposes from regulatory compliance to education, engagement, I would like to set the stage first for those unfamiliar with what pharma meetings are and define them. What are the key types of meetings that pharma and life sciences companies or agencies run, and what are their primary objectives?
All right. So if you're not familiar with the industry, and I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me in trouble, but that's fine. You can think of events, meetings, and events in pharma. It's a little bit the equivalent of influencer marketing.
Mm.
Now, please don't say that that way, right? Because the
Well,
industry
it's the
will.
analogy. It's the
Well, it's
analogy
the
we're going to
analogy,
use.
right? Recently, somebody had me to present at an audience that didn't know and asked me the very same question. And in a way, it's the pharma industry, and I know they're getting a lot of bad rap these days, right? But at the core, it is one of the most critical industries. I mean, imagine this: they sell what's the most precious to us, which is life,
Yeah.
right? And health and well-being, right? And no matter how you think about this, they're putting a lot of effort and time and money in research and innovation to help us have a better, longer life. And this is mission critical. I mean, what is the most mission critical thing that any companies can do out there? And so again, they have a bit of a bad rap these days, and also with, I have to say, with for sometimes good reasons, which also we can help in events. But at the core, this is a beautiful, essential mission. Okay, so this is what I think pharma does. And if you think about meetings and events, so the other thing to realize about pharma is the people who buy, and it depends on the country you're in, whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Europe, without getting too political on payer system and healthcare, right? Usually you need to convince the person who is prescribing the pill, the drug, that this drug is effective, but that's not the person who is actually taking it, right? Who is the patient. So what pharma events are primarily concerned about is educating, influencing, informing the prescriber, the doctor, or as people call it in the industry, the HCP, the healthcare professional. And so events, pharma meetings, pharma events are primarily all about interacting, building relationship with healthcare professionals. Now, the way to think about this is in a commercial life cycle, like over time, like the lifetime of a drug, which I'm sure everyone has heard about. Like you've got some folks who are researching and putting some compounds together, and then suddenly, boof, they have a molecule, right? And they've started to test it, and then they think this is, so they go into clinical trials. So this is the clinical phase, the R&D phase. And already there you have meetings, because the way this works is that in stage 3 or in stage 4 clinical trials, what happens is that this is a distributed, often a very global effort. And so what the way pharma does this is that they basically enroll site, usually hospitals and research institutions around the world or around the country, to basically enroll intern patients into their trial. And this effort is actually, and if you look into it, it's actually beautiful because it's highly coordinated. It's also highly regulated. So this is what people call investigator meetings, because
Mhm.
you actually put all those people doing those trials together. You're putting them together once a year, once a quarter, to remind them what's important, to inform them about what's the protocol, what are the potential adverse effect, what they should think about, because it's a new drug, right? It's not even a drug, it's an attempt to become a drug, right? And so this is pre-clinical, if you like, R&D stage. This investigator meeting is like the first type of events. And then just before it's about, usually we'll get through approval, and approval is depending on the country, it's timed differently. It could be approved in the US and then in other countries later on. So this is when you go into sort of the launch or pre-launch. And this is where you have other types of meetings like advisory board, where basically you gather, I would say, the key healthcare professional, the so-called KOL, key opinion leaders, into smaller groups to get their ideas on how to best communicate and concerns and common questions that they will get about this potential treatment. This is called an advisory board. And then you'll have launch meetings, which are very much like any other launch meeting, if you like, but typically with healthcare professionals. And then you've got the commercial phase, because the thing is, usually you have a patent, that exclusivity for a couple of years. And this is the moment where you're going to be the only one in the market. So this is where you enjoy, I would say, exclusivity, and you go like full throttle in trying to get your drug as widely used, as widely prescribed. And that's the commercial phase. And this is where this is really around educating everybody who's potentially around, every healthcare professional who's potentially around that compound. And here we're talking about the primary prescriber, which are usually specialists, but it could be GPs, it could also be nurses, and in some instances, in very, very special instances, patients as well. So all these moments are, I would say, education moment, engagement moment, and they usually take the form of a meeting. And by the way, it's huge. I think you said billion of dollars in your introduction. Is actually shown that we've actually shown that every pharma company is spending between 2 to 3% of their revenue. And so it could be billion plus for a single company on meetings and events. So
Wow.
that's essentially how we break down the category.
Well, I'll tell you, this is the best definition that I've heard from anyone when it comes to pharma meetings and the roadmap and the cycle that they go through. So, thank you so much. And I can tell that you have seen the evolution of those meetings over years and years, and you've been involved with them firsthand. What do you think has changed the most? Like, let's just say in the past decade.
Yeah. And it is actually one of the reasons we, as a company, as SpotMe, we started to specialize into this. And so well, you don't know, but I'm married. My wife is a medical doctor.
Mhm.
And as we started to build SpotMe, she was coming out of medical school, and she's a specialist. And she's also started to get into those meetings. And the way she reported this back to me is like, it's stable. These are 3-hour PowerPoint lectures. And she told me, I remember the first couple of events that she did, she told me, like, don't get fooled. You do not understand because you're not a specialist, but most people in the room don't understand either. They just pretend, but it's
Mm,
just like this. We talk technical scientific gibberish, and everyone seems to be nodding. So I'm exaggerating, of course, but the reality is, because the topics are very complex, because the nature of what's being shared is complex, it's hugely challenging to make it engaging, to make it interesting, to just not making it boring. And
right.
what I've realized is that there was also a bit of a generation shift here,
Mhm.
where the people who were born with maybe a new generation of media, and I'm talking last 20 years, they are not just going to accept a lecture anymore. And that's as simple as that. So I think the biggest shift is that you can't bore people,
Yeah.
and you can't bore doctors the way, and I think it's true for every event, by the way, but especially for this field, because it's highly technical. It's just not accepted. I mean, if you do this, and it's still happening, we still have customers, or we see customers where this is happening. People will basically tell you, I don't want to see you anymore. I don't want to hear, I don't want to participate anymore, because this is terrible. So it's not acceptable to put together a program where it's one presentation, one lecture after another, 45 minutes. Thank you
Or
very much.
longer.
Very slides that are, you probably need a telescope to
Yes.
read the chart on the slide. And then it's like, what have you learned? Well, I don't know, right? So that has changed. This is just not acceptable anymore.
Absolutely. It's funny because I've been on the production side of quite a few of those pharma meetings, conferences, annual congresses, the whole gamut. And on the production side, right, you would be running all the slides, you get all the presenters ready. And I remember running those presentations back to back, as you said, right, like slides upon slides, little break in between them. I mean, you start at 8 a.m. and barely stop for lunch at 1:30, and it would be no break. Like you just have like one doctor after another, a panelist of like 20. And I was always curious, do people in the room, the audience that they fill those chairs with, do they enjoy it?
That
I
was
mean,
exactly the point. I was like, you understand what they're saying, right? And my wife was like,
right,
no,
like do
no, we
they
don't.
actually, or
No, we don't.
are
Yeah.
they forced in a way to be there because they have to get their credits, accreditations, all the things? So like you're there physically, but your brain can only capture so much. And after a period of time, maybe if you're a doctor, that time attention span is longer than your average person. That is said that our attention span has dropped to like 7 seconds out of a goldfish or something,
But
right?
it's
But
funny
even
you
then, you're
yeah,
human.
it's funny you mentioned that, because so one of the things, so when that started to happen, and then we started to go and pitch to medical communication agencies and to pharma companies, hey, maybe we can help. And it was like, what? And the most interactive, the most disruptive thing that these folks had seen at the time is like this keypad, this voting keypads, like
Right.
clickers, like, and this was wow. And we said, well, that's a good start. But then I found it was actually a piece of research, I don't know from where, but it basically said if the maximum attention span in a presentation is 20 minutes, and if you don't plant some sort of like change and shift and interruption and variation and a little thing, that little sparkle that just resets your brain, then you're lost. After 20 minutes, people like, and that's for a good speaker. And most pharma, by the way, most pharma speakers are table speakers.
They're not speakers. They're,
Yeah,
yeah, they're presenters putting
yeah,
their research out there and hoping that you're gonna grasp it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for most of those presentations, I would tell you like it was a different language, and every so often you'd capture an English word.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So as long as we heard next or here's the next presenter, I'm like, I feel like we're in the right room. We understand what's going on.
And it's because we started to pitch this, and eventually we landed our first contract. And I remember forever, and I unfortunately can't share company names, but it's one of the famous pharma companies where and at the time, SpotMe was still a little handheld, like a mini Game Boy, right? We will like hand those out at the start of the event, and people will keep it. And I was being brought in what they call the slide review for the faculty. Faculty is the name of the speaker. So for the scientific committee advisory board for that meeting. And I came in, and yeah, I think it's fair to say at that time I was probably half the age of everyone in the room, and probably even more than that. And the most prominent researcher in the field in the world, and it was in oncology, so highly respected,
Yeah.
etc. And they were like, Pierre, can you please present how we're gonna make this conference more interactive? And I saw them like looking at me like, that's not, and I took my
Not at all intimidated. Oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah.
what
And I
are
took
all
my
these
SpotMe
people?
and I took my little SpotMe device out. I was like, so we are going to give this to every attendee. And yeah, they'll be able to interact that with you, right, during your presentations and when your slide review with all the speakers. We're going to add polling questions, but we're also going to make case studies. We're going to make after, before. We're going to make a little knowledge quiz as they enter, and then we're going to take the knowledge again, another test, and we're going to show how the unmet medical needs. And then we're going to do Q&A, so you'll be able to select which question you want to talk about. I was really trying to make it like they can shine. And then the chairperson, who was actually a very old but distinguished German professor in his very thick German accent, took a SpotMe that I had put in his hand, and he threw it in the middle of the table and said, "We're not doing this." And that was
Because
it.
that meant more work for
And that was
them.
it. This was the most influential guy in the space.
Yeah,
And that client told me, "Look, thank you, but
that is intimidating. That is
well,
scary
it was
because
disappointing because we had put a lot of time into this, and this is also when you realize you can have great ideas, but if people, and especially the key stakeholder here, they don't buy into it. But the end of the story is a year later, we changed things a little bit. We also launched something that was at a time where the speakers actually have it on their iPad, and we were literally like And it was the same person, right? Training them like how to manage a Q&A panel with an iPad. And at the time it was revolutionary, where you could all see all the questions and there was somebody in the back like already like pre-sorting, tagging, etc. And the same old German professor like finally accepted to get on stage. And he was like bragging how he almost invented this himself. And it was a great event. It was a great event. The entire event was just like expert panel discussions. And they had very little slide. It was many people asking real questions from real human beings with real patients. And it changed the whole dynamic. And everyone was smiling and happy. And that's the beauty of events, by the way. You see you've done a good job because you can see people in the eyes when they walk out of the room and you see, okay, here we nailed it. So yeah,
I
takes
love that.
time.
Before we continue, I want to give a shout out to the team at TreeFan Events. We are not just an event planning and production agency. We are focused on integrating innovative AV solutions, AI strategies, and wellness-focused practices through our Fit for Events framework. Whether you're planning live, virtual, or hybrid events, the team at TreeFan Events is here to provide personalized planning, strategic design, and seamless technology management to ensure everything runs flawlessly. And now, we are offering AI-powered workshops to help you grow your business, build stronger teams, and elevate your events to the next level. If you want to learn more about how the team at TreeFan Events can help make your event unforgettable, visit treefanevents.com.
So I think two things that just stood out for me from that story is it's hard to change the mindset of people if they've done things one way for a very long time, right? Like to get on with technology, to try something new, to reinvent in a way something that you've done the same way, it's hard. So like maybe taking, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So introducing one thing now, introducing the next thing next, that to me felt like the easiest way to onboard anyone, especially when it came to technology, just using this clicker versus that clicker. Oh, this has so many more buttons, or this has less buttons. Doesn't mean it's worse. No, it's better, because now you only have to focus on green and red. You don't have to focus on 7 buttons that looks like, what if I press the wrong thing, right? And then I think also with progress and evolution comes a slew of new challenges, right? And what I used to work back in the days doesn't mean that's going to work now. As you mentioned, generational gaps are real, and you have all these new doctors, new experts coming into the industry. They're not going to digest information and education the same way everyone else has. And I saw in those rooms, in those meetings, the gap can be really wide, like between older experts, older doctors, and then you have the younger generation, the interns, everyone that's getting into the industry. That's a huge gap, and they have a different expectation of how they would like that information to be presented to them, so they can not just receive it but
Mm.
also ingest it and be able to act upon. So there's a lot of things that can be done better. And I guess what I would like to get to in our conversation here, because despite the progress, right, there's still a lot of inefficiencies in how pharma meetings are run today. What do you feel are the biggest challenges that event planners face, event technology face, as we move into the future? And we're not even touching on AI yet, right?
Yeah, we're not even touching that yet, but I think we will. So especially in the pharma space, so anyone who's worked with life sciences and not just in events has heard the magic word of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And compliance, it's like one of these wild cards or red cards. Well, this is not red, but that you basically that people, I'm just gonna say people pull out of their pocket to say we're not gonna do that. Compliance. And it's almost as a, I mean, I get it. Like, this is a regulated industry. We're talking about people most precious thing, life and health and well-being. So of course you have to get through certain safety protocols, and also the way you work and market around those new compounds, it has to be regulated and it makes sense. And there has been in the past bad things that have been done by certain companies who are trying to influence healthcare professional in a way that's totally not ethical. So we all understand why there are rules. The issue, and this is really the, the biggest challenge in that space is that compliance is like this black cloud
Mm,
that no one really knows what's actually allowed, what's not allowed. And you can think of it, these are large companies, right? So if the rule book is not 100% clear, what you think most people are going to do, they're probably going to assume it's not allowed.
right.
And so, if you want to change the space, if you want to make things better, the compliance hammer is always going, sorry, is always going to hit you. And people learn very quickly, right? Not to be hit by the hammer. And what they do, they retreat, right? They
Yeah.
just hide and they just don't change. And unfortunately, it's a fact. And it's, by the way, with events, with meetings, with marketing, with a lot of things in or with IT, that's unfortunately the situation for a lot of things in life sciences. And it frustrates people who
Hmm.
crave, who want to change, innovator, disrupts those people who want to go fast. It frustrates a lot of people who do not come from the industry. And then they suddenly try this industry. And I recently heard this at a conference. It's a customer who said it, not me. And he said something like a pharma marketer, somebody who is working in marketing in pharma, will probably be fired after 20 seconds in any other company. And because they just used to do things in a way that's not so another company will expect it to be much quicker and faster, so it slows things down. And now the good thing is that, and this is also where AI comes in, by the way, there are some people who are changing the game here. So you have people who start to say, now that's it, we need to clarify what we can do, what kind of event we're allowed to do, because all of this is very boring, right? If you organize an event in Belgium, for example, the so-called meal caps, the meal cannot exceed $40. If you do the same event in France, it's $30. If you do and then in the US, it's very similar. It's even state legislation and state code that has certain meal caps. And this is just a tiny example of it.
Hmm.
And then if you want to make something that's a bit innovative on the format and interaction and the engagement, no, we can't. We're not allowed to. Compliance will say no.
Mm,
etc. So this is to say that that's unfortunately the biggest challenge. And I almost want to say it's not even a challenge anymore. It's the biggest excuse that people have.
absolutely. I think that is one of the hardest thing to also navigate, because you're right. Like, what's in this cloud? I see the storm coming, but I don't see the compound of what's happening there, and I don't understand it. I just see the effects of it. So I guess now that we've identified the biggest pain point, is there a solution? You've worked with countless of pharma focused agencies, and you've helped them implement certain strategies. Do you have any tips on what are the strategies or tools that have
Mm.
actually made a difference in improving those type of meetings?
So if you flip, I would say the problem is, why does compliance exist is because bad things have been done, and been done in terms of trying to influence the prescription habits of healthcare professionals. And this is exactly what the regulation, the codes, the laws are trying to prevent, right? That it's a fair game, it's a level playing field, and that everyone stick to the same rules. And at the core, it's a good, I think it's coming from a good place. Now, you can ask yourself the question, like, why does this exist? Is because, well, I mean, at the end of the day, somebody is trying to sell a drug here. And it's more the question, like, how do I make that influence and how do I get that message across? Now, there's another problem that's happening, and that's more like self inflicted by pharma. It's this commercial bias. And it's, by the way, happening with every industry too, is that when you tell sales, go and sell it, they become very salesy, and everyone suddenly hates sales. And in B2B, by the way, and that's not only in pharma, in B2B, most buyers, the last thing that they want to do is to talk to a salesperson, which is
Yes.
kind of sad, right? And they do everything else but talking to the sales guy. They go to the website, they watch videos, they read the literature, they go on this podcast, they watch webinars, they go to events,
They
but they
block
don't
the
want
LinkedIn salesperson
the
from
sales
reaching
guy.
out.
Don't bring the sales guy, please. I want to learn everything about your product, but don't bring the sales guy. And that's why, yeah, because if we bring the sales guy, this is why we have compliance, right? Because that's
Mhm.
so this whole, I would call it, this big misunderstanding can be resolved. And this is where events come in, because events are magical, and they're magical in B2B, they're magical in pharma. When you go to an event, it doesn't feel like it's a sales thing. People have their defense up there when you're trying to sell them, but if you go to an event, poof, this is cool. It's a bit of hospitality. There's a lot of education. There's networking. I put my defense down. So I'm cool, right? I'm not being sold that. But the problem is in pharma, the event content is, or used at least, used to be so commercially biased. Like you look
Mhm.
at the slides and you're like, that patient, it cannot exist. It's something that's so stereotyped for this compound. It's magically the perfect, and people know it's never the perfect case. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we need doctors to deal with this problem, because otherwise it would just be as simple as prescribing it to patients directly. And so to come to the solution is that instead of like generating content, the perfect sales content that you can slap at the HCP's face and they're like, oh, that's too good to be true. I'm not eating this, right? The way to do it, and the way to do it today is to basically do what we call peer-to-peer education. So you take other doctors to often key opinion leaders to interact with healthcare professionals and perform this and share this education. But so do this in a way where you actually crowdsource the content. So one example to that is in my example earlier on how in a medical education event people are asking questions. So you can refine this a little bit. And what you do is that you ask people, say, hey, do you want to share a case, a patient that you've had in your practice in the past couple of months? And you actually give them a little template on the app where that's a template like this that's targeted to the disease that you're talking about here, where like what's the age, what was the symptom, and what was the first imagery, what was the first therapy that you provide, first line therapy, second line therapy, what was the result, blah blah blah, very targeted. And then you answer like 20 questions. By the way, it's crazy because most doctors actually have all those top cases in their mind. They don't even have to look
Wow.
it up. And then you've created your event content. You need 10 people to say this. And the beautiful thing for pharma is you can still pick, maybe you get 20 and you still pick the five that you think, okay, this really illustrates the efficacy of my compound and or whatever I want to talk about. And I'm going to show this. And suddenly, instead of having some fake case, which smells so much like fake and perfect, you're going to have like, this case has been submitted by Dr. Johnny over there. And then everyone is like, wow, this is true. This is real. This is so genuine. This is so
Yeah.
authentic. And it does change. So I think part of the answer is don't try to kill compliance, like play with the rule, use content that's sourced by HCPs themselves. Try to be, in this case with pharma, try to be more like the moderator, the facilitator of the exchange rather than the creator of the content. And that I think is really the way pharma events are going to be organized in the future.
I love this case study that you just gave and the example because it really shows the evolution of how technology is being used to solve some of those challenges. Like you're humanizing the content, right? You're not just putting this, like you said, clinical example on paper, on slides, and then there is no face behind it. There is no human behind it. Whereas when you bring those case studies, real case studies, then you can talk about real people going through this like in their real lives, not in some made up fantasy that we live in. And I would love to know from you, with that in mind, especially as we alluded a little bit to AI and what that brings to the industry and how it's reshaping the industry right now. How do you see it? How do you see AI and automation? How do you see reshaping some of the meetings that you're involved with, some of the technology that you're involved with? And do you see any immediate use case that you particularly are excited about?
Yeah. Okay, you can go and ask the same question to any tech CEO, event tech CEO, and you're gonna have, yeah, this is the one use case that we're gonna do approval, we're gonna do compliance with AI, we're gonna do event approval, and etc. So here's my take. I think the recent events in AI have shown that the model isn't really going to be the key because models are even like open source now. And so the thing that seems to be core to the success of whatever you're going to do with AI, without even discussing what we can do, but I'll come to that in a minute, is going to be like, what's the data that you can get? And this is cliche, right? Everyone talks about data,
Mm-hmm.
we have too much data,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But here's the thing. Events are one of the, if not the richest channel in a lot of industry, but certainly in life sciences. If you want to know what's in the brain of that doctor over there, invite her to an event. And I can tell you what she thinks. I can tell you how she feels about your compound. I can tell you what her concern is. I can tell you what her reservation, perhaps what her hope, perhaps how many patients she's seeing today, perhaps who else she could enroll in that clinical trial. There are 50 things I can tell you if that event is properly executed. And of course, if those data points are properly captured. And this is the beautiful things about meetings and about adding this engagement layer and engagement data capture layer on top of meetings. Because from a customer engagement perspective, this is the best place. This is completely unbiased. People are in education mode and they are going to be extremely open and transparent on how they share directly or indirectly. So the game here, before we even talk about like how we're going to apply some language model or some automation, is like, okay, how can I know more than
Mm,
about my customer, in this case my healthcare professional? So this is the first thing, and this is why at SpotMe, and this is not even my sales pitch, but this is why at SpotMe we've created Onomi, who is, and
right.
that's our lifestyle solution. And the key differentiator here, and we tell this to every customer, if you're not linking all your meetings and events that you're having with HCP, if this is not going to your CRM, probably you should not do it. It's probably just a waste of your time. And if you're going to a congress or convention and you're not scanning and linking this directly into CRM and recording your conversation or your key points and understanding feedback, sentiment, priorities, number of patients back to the CRM, it's a massive wasted opportunity. So don't do it. So this is the first thing. Before we even talk about AI, you need to have good
Data
granular
set.
deep
Yeah.
data that I can have a better conversation with this person as a human being, right? And then, of
Mhm.
course, this is when it's magical. When you bring the machine in, if you have that data, you can really have that relevant conversation that impresses any HCP.
So, Pierre, for anyone that's not familiar with Onomi, because we touched on it, what is it set to do? What problem does it solve?
Okay, so we've talked. You asked me earlier about all the different types of meetings and events in pharma.
Hmm.
Um, Hopefully by now, as we've talked through this, you've probably understood there's a lot of nitty gritty in terms of compliance, in terms of execution, in terms of use cases. And so what happens today is in most companies is that all these different types of meeting engagement, they're being served by different sets of technologies, by different companies, by different service providers. And that fragmentation
Hmm.
is a huge cost to most companies. It's a huge cost. It's also a huge amount of work in terms of manual processes of bringing this data back into a one consolidated piece. And it's also a huge data loss in the sense that we could know more about those people, but we're not actually collecting that data. And so this means that there's someone sitting in all these pharma companies who is thinking, okay, right now I have 27 vendors. How do I reduce this to one? Right now, I'm spending 100 millions a year in all my convention and congresses. This is just one type of engagement. And how am I going to reduce that cost? Now, same question. I'm spending $100 million on this activity. How do I know the ROI? How can I measure it? How can I hold my people and my agencies accountable for that? And so this is what Onomi sets out to resolve, is to basically bring this single place where end to end you can execute all your event centric customer engagement for life sciences. And that's a lot of different small things that all come together in a way that's streamlined. It's a suite of different software pieces, and that we're all bringing back in the center of the commercial data, which is the CRM for life sciences.
I love that. So now that we set the stage for Onami and we talked about how important it is to have like clear, real data set that will inform your decisions. And we also touch on compliance and how that is a big issue. When it comes to bringing AI into the picture, especially for this industry, there's always going to be some ethical challenges. There's always going to be some privacy and security challenges. How do you mitigate that? How do you, I guess, advise other agencies and companies to mitigate those risks?
Well, you have to know the rules. I mean, I complained earlier about compliance, and most people,
Goes back to compliance.
no. But I mean, I complained about it as people having this as an excuse. But at the end of the day, I think as a tech vendor, we have to know the rules. We know the rules, and what we're doing is educating our customer around the rules. Also, because a lot of those rules are made up and they don't really exist, we can also tell them this you can do, this you cannot do. And often we get, and we're very opinionated as a technology vendor. This means that we're ready to even go nearly in a conflict with our own customers to tell them, no, this is not accurate. This is actually allowed. And if you want to reach your engagement objectives, which is what people are trying to do, you should go to your compliance officer. You should let us talk to your compliance team, and we're going to get the approval for this particular activity. So I think to answer your question, it's really like understanding the rules. There's a complete lack of education.
Mhm.
I'm actually working right now on a compliance book, if you like, for
Mm.
event tech in pharma meetings and events. We're working with a compliance expert who is helping us like be the authoritative voice, like this is you can do, this is what you cannot do.
That's fantastic. And yes, I think innovation is super exciting and it definitely brings us to today's age and it moves the industry further. But I also think there's this thing where not all new tech translates into real value. And a lot of pharma planners, when they evaluate which tools are worth investing in, they're looking at what are the reasons why I should invest into this new technology. So what separates, in your opinion, a truly impactful pharma event tech solution from one that just adds a bunch of additional complexity that
Yeah.
might be needed or not?
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit on the different benefits, but I think at the core, what you have is you have a benefit for the business. So in this case, from a commercial or from a medical side, where I was with a customer 3 days ago and he used a nice word, which I'm going to steal here, helping flip doctors. Like this person is not convinced that this is a right compound. We help our customers flip this person, right? And like be a promoter, be a prescriber, and not be skeptical about it. So the whole idea is like, how many people can we flip? And the way this is being done with Onomi is that we help understanding what flipping means, right? And flipping is typically what's the sentiment, what's the satisfaction, what's the degree of engagement. And you're looking, and these are, by the way, three different things, right? And just to break it down, what's the engagement? Meaning, like, if we invite this person to webinar, does she come? If she registers, does she actually attend? If she's attending, is she actually participating to polls and sending questions? Right. So that's at the core engagement. And is she responding to the survey, etc.? It's like, oh, she participates, she's active, right? Engagement is usually a positive sign.
Mhm.
Now, if we think about the other thing, which is what's the satisfaction? So a lot of events, and it's true for every event, people ask, you send them a feedback survey and you ask them like, okay, are you happy with it? Is it net promoter score? Would you recommend it? Or what was your experience like? Or did you learn X, Y, and Z? Right. That's like what people tell you, right? And then there's the sort of third thing, which is the sentiment, is that you use all these breadcrumbs that people have left behind, usually in written form. And you basically look, and this is where natural language processing comes in. It's not yet AI, just NLP comes in, where you can basically say, this person, the way she writes, the way she asks that question, the way she tells you the meeting was very interesting, she's neutral, or she's positive, or she's negative, right? And
Mm.
with these three different things, engagement, satisfaction, and sentiment, you can actually come to a conclusion like where this person is, right? And everybody will have a metric, different persona, etc. To every customer will have these different models, but this is where we can help and then effectively find who is the one we should be engaging more, because this one is closer to flip. And this is in the next stage now, predictive analytics, like helping our customers decide and make bets on who is the person we should invite, because that's expensive and we only have X spot for going to a certain congress or a certain convention. And this is where I think decision making with AI is incredibly helpful.
I love that. As they say, knowledge is power. The right knowledge also is power as well. As we come to a wrap up of our conversation, which is very informing, very helpful, personally for me, and I'm pretty sure for our audience as well. If you could give our pharma event planners one piece of advice to make their meetings more impactful, not just in the new age of AI, but also in general, what would that be?
Yeah. So I'm just thinking for 1 second because you said a piece of advice to make the meetings more impactful. I would tell the following to pharma event planners. Think about yourself, and it's going to sound strange, right? Be selfish. Think about yourself and think about how you're going to explain the impact of what you do to leadership. What we are seeing right now is meeting planners doing one of the most difficult jobs out there and not getting the respect that they deserve. And especially being ignored, even though they know how it is on the ground and how it is with all these convention and meetings and events and congresses. And one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about, we are very passionate about here at Onomi, is helping event planners show the tangible results and impact and outcomes of their meetings and events. And at the end of the day, it boils down to one thing. What's the dashboard that you're going to show during your event to your leadership, and what's the dashboard you're going to show at the end of every quarter to this executive committee to show that what you're doing and the millions that have gone into these activities actually have an impact? So that will really be, if you want to get a seat at that leadership, bigger omni-channel table, as people call it these days, think about how you're going to present yourself, not from somebody who is like in hospitality or logistics, but like in analytics, and like this is the outcome, this is the impact we had with all our meetings.
I love that. I remember somebody saying something like, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you want a seat at the table, stop talking logistics and start talking strategy. And what you're just saying right now is with these dashboards, with the data, with the analytics, you can then start talking logistics because then you can show
Yeah, you can have a lot of more budget when you have something to prove for it. That's for sure, because otherwise people would just cut it.
Exactly. Well, Pierre, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage with me and with our audience and explain the behind the scenes of pharma meetings and events. For anyone that wants to learn more about SpotMe or Onomi or connect with you, where can they find you?
Well, Onomi.io, that's the landing page, of course, of our solution. In there, if you go to events, we actually have a series that we're running every 2 weeks. It's called Elevating Events for Omnichannel Engagement. And here we're having people from all aspects of the profession around pharma events and life science engagement, coming from meetings, from congresses, but from agencies, but also from commercial and from medical and commercial excellence in IT. So if you're interested in the space, just go to onomi.io and then on events.
And is it true that you're hosting those conversations?
We are hosting those conversations, absolutely.
I love it. Well, if you also want to check Pierre out on LinkedIn, he's available on that as well. I appreciate so much your time today. And with that, this is it for today's episode. If you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your network. And until next time, keep innovating, keep elevating, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in events. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Anka. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Events Demystified podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with other professionals like yourself. If you're interested in learning more about TreeFan events, including our future AI education talks and workshops, or to see how we can support your next event, book a free 20-minute consultation through the link in the episode notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and social media for updates on future episodes, industry insights, AI news and tips, and more. And if you have any topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out.